The gunshot echoed across the plains as Beatrice Montgomery fled into the darkness, the hem of her tattered dress catching on sagebrush as she ran blindly toward the horizon. Behind her, the ranch house that had been her prison for 2 years burned against the Montana night sky, orange flames licking at the stars as though trying to set the heavens ablaze. She clutched nothing but the simple gold band on her finger, the cruel irony of a marriage that had become her torment. Montana Territory, 1876. The unforgiving wilderness stretched before her like an ocean, promising either salvation or death with equal indifference. Beatrice had chosen the unknown over the certainty of her husband's escalating violence. Harold Winters had been charming, once a wealthy cattle baron who had promised her security after her father's death left her destitute. But his true nature emerged after the wedding, and tonight he had finally gone too far. The bitter night air burned her lungs as she pushed forward, her bare feet bleeding on the rocky ground. She had no plan beyond escape, no destination beyond a way. The darkness swallowed her whole, and only when the glow of the burning ranch house disappeared behind the rolling hills did she finally collapse beneath a twisted juniper tree. Morning came with merciless brightness, exposing her predicament in harsh light. Her dress, once fine cream silk, was torn and stained with blood and soot. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves around her bruised face. She had nothing but the wedding ring she couldn't bring herself to discard. It was worth something, at least perhaps enough to start anew somewhere Harold would never find her. Beatrice walked for hours before spotting a thin trail of smoke rising above a stand of cottonwoods in the distance. Hope and fear warred within her. It could be help or danger. With few options, she moved cautiously toward it. The small camp appeared deserted at first glance, just a smoldering fire and a coffee pot suspended above it. Then she noticed the saddled horse grazing nearby, its reins dragging on the ground. "Madam, I'd suggest announcing yourself before approaching a man's camp." The deep voice came from behind her, making Beatrice whirl around, nearly losing her balance. He stood tall against the morning sun, a Winchester rifle held casually at his side. His face was weathered beneath a well-worn Stetson, eyes the color of a summer storm assessing her with a practiced wariness. Not young, but not old, perhaps 30 years with life's experiences etched into the lines around his eyes. "I mean no harm," she managed, her voice raspy from thirst. The man's expression shifted, caution giving way to concern as he took in her battered appearance. "Looks like harm's already found you," he lowered his rifle. "Name's Daniel Morgan. Most folks call me Dan." "Beatrice," she offered, unwilling to give her married name. "Beatrice Mon," she stopped herself, reverting to her maiden name, Montgomery. Daniel nodded, seeming to understand her hesitation. "You're welcome to water and coffee, Miss Montgomery. Got some jerky too, if you've a mind to eat." "Mrs.," she corrected automatically, then flinched at her own admission, her hand unconsciously covering the ring. He noticed the gesture but said nothing, merely gesturing toward his camp. Beatrice followed, legs trembling with exhaustion as she lowered herself to a fallen log near the fire. Daniel handed her a tin cup of water, which she drank greedily before accepting the coffee he offered next. The hot liquid revived her somewhat, though it couldn't wash away the fear that still clung to her like a second skin. "Your husband know you're out here?" Daniel asked finally, his tone deliberately casual as he added more wood to the fire. Beatrice stiffened. "If he does, I'm as good as dead." Daniel's eyes narrowed, but he nodded slowly. "Reckon that tells me what I need to know." He studied her for a long moment. "I'm heading to Redemption Springs. It's a small settlement about 3 days' ride from here. You're welcome to ride along if you've nowhere else to go." Beatrice hesitated, weighing her limited options. This man was a stranger, but something in his steady gaze suggested reliability. And she had nowhere else to turn. "Why would you help me?" she asked, suspicious of kindness after all she'd endured. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. My mama raised me to believe a person in need is a chance to do right in the world, he shrugged. Besides, looks to me like you could use a friend. My husband is Harold Winters, she said, watching his reaction carefully. He owns half the cattle in this territory and has friends in every town. Daniel's expression darkened. I know of Winters. His reputation isn't as pristine as he'd like folks to believe. He considered her with new understanding. That changes things. We'll need to be careful. Within the hour, they had broken camp. Daniel offered her his spare shirt and a pair of trousers that were comically large but more practical than her ruined dress. She changed behind a stand of trees, rolling up the pants' legs and cinching them with rope. When she emerged, Daniel was securing their meager supplies to his horse. "This is Scout," he said, patting the dun gelding's neck. "He's sturdy enough to carry us both a ways, but we'll need to find you a mount of your own soon. It'll be slow going otherwise." Beatrice approached the horse cautiously. It had been years since she'd ridden, though she'd loved it as a girl. "He won't bite," Daniel assured her. "Not unless you've got an apple hidden in those oversized breeches." The teasing brought a slight smile to her face, the first in longer than she could remember. Daniel's eyes warmed at the sight, and something passed between them, brief as lightning, but just as electric. They traveled west through the day, Daniel in the saddle and Beatrice riding behind him, her arms reluctantly circling his waist for balance. He kept them to less traveled paths, avoiding the main trails where Harold's men might be searching for her. By nightfall, they had covered considerable ground, and Daniel chose a sheltered ravine for their camp. As they sat beside another small fire, Beatrice finally found the courage to share her story. She told him about her father's death, the crushing debts that had left her vulnerable to Harold's courtship, and the gradual revelation of his true nature after their wedding. "At first it was just words," she said softly, staring into the flames. "Then grabbing, shoving. Last night her voice broke. He said he was tired of waiting for an heir, that if I couldn't give him one, he had no use for me." Daniel's jaw tightened, and the fire. "I knocked over a lamp when I fell. It caught the curtains. He was distracted by the flames. I ran." She twisted the wedding ring on her finger. "This is all I have left. Funny, isn't it? The symbol of everything I'm running from is my only means of survival now." Daniel watched her across the fire, his expression unreadable. "Get some rest, Beatrice. Tomorrow will be another long day." She curled up in the blanket he provided, expecting sleep to elude her, but exhaustion claimed her quickly. She dreamed of running, always running, with Harold's voice calling her name through the darkness. Dawn broke with a gentle rain, and they continued westward with renewed urgency. Daniel grew increasingly vigilant, scanning the horizon frequently and keeping them under tree cover when possible. "There's a trading post about half a day's ride from here," he told her as they mounted Scout. "Friend of mine runs it. We can get supplies, maybe news of any search parties. Do you think they're looking for me? A man like Winters won't take kindly to being left," Daniel said grimly. "Especially not the way you did it. His pride will demand you back or revenge." The trading post appeared after midday, a weathered log structure with a corral containing several horses. Daniel approached cautiously, circling wide to observe the building from a distance. "Two horses I don't recognize," he murmured. "Could be anything, travelers, traders, could be Winters' men too." They waited in the shelter of a pine grove until the strangers emerged, two trappers by the look of them, and departed northward. Only then did Daniel guide Scout toward the post. The proprietor, a barrel-chested man with a magnificent gray beard, rushed out to greet them. "Morgan, you old wolf, thought you'd be halfway to Colorado by now. Change of plans, Hank," Daniel replied, dismounting and helping Beatrice down. "This is no names," Beatrice interjected quickly. "Please?" Hank's bushy eyebrows rose, but he nodded. Any friend of Morgan's got no need to explain herself here. He ushered them inside, where the shadowy interior offered welcome relief from the sun. While Daniel gathered supplies, Hank pulled him aside, speaking in hushed tones Beatrice couldn't quite make out. She wandered through the small store, touching items from the world she'd left behind, bolts of fabric, tinned foods, patent medicines promising relief from various ailments. None could cure what plagued her. "Beatrice," Daniel called, motioning her over. "Hank's got news we need to hear." The older man stroked his beard nervously. "Winters has riders out all over the territory. Word is his wife tried to murder him and burned down their ranch. There's a reward for her, dead or alive." Cold dread washed over Beatrice. We know," Daniel cut in. "But that's the story being told, changes our plans somewhat." He turned to Hank. "We need horses, good ones, and supplies for a longer journey than I first reckoned." "Got a mare would suit the lady," Hank replied. "And I can spare what supplies you need, but where will you go? Winters has connections throughout Montana and into Wyoming." Daniel's eyes met Beatrice's. "Colorado, maybe, or further south, somewhere beyond Winter's reach. You're going with her?" Hank asked, surprise evident in his tone. "Thought you were heading back to your claim." "Plans change," Daniel said simply, though something in his expression suggested the decision wasn't as casual as he made it sound. They left the trading post with 2 horses Scout and a sorrel mare Beatrice named Liberty, loaded with supplies enough for weeks of travel. Hank refused payment, telling Daniel to consider it settlement for an old debt. As they rode south, Beatrice felt both relief and guilt. "You've abandoned your own plans for me," she said. "I can't ask that of you." "You didn't ask," Daniel replied. "Some things are more important than gold." "Is that what waits at your claim? Gold?" A shadow crossed his face. "Was hoping so. Been working that stream for 2 seasons now. Found enough to keep me going, but not the strike I've been hoping for." "And now you're giving it up," he shrugged. "Claim will still be there later. If it's not, there's always another creek to pan." They camped that night in a deep gully, sheltered from both the elements and searching eyes. As Daniel prepared their simple meal, Beatrice caught him watching her, his gaze quickly shifting away when their eyes met. "Tell me about yourself," she said, settling beside the fire. "I know nothing about the man who's risking his life for me." Daniel poked at the flames with a stick. "Not much to tell. Grew up in Ohio, fought for the Union, though I was young, lied about my age to enlist. After the war, there wasn't much left for me back east, so I drifted west, tried ranching, scouting, even marshaling for a spell. None quite fit until I found prospecting." "And family?" she asked, then immediately regretted the question when his face closed off. "Had a wife once," he said flatly. "Caroline. Yellow fever took her and our boy in '68. "I'm sorry," Beatrice whispered. He nodded his acknowledgement but offered nothing more, and she didn't press. They ate in companionable silence, the crackling fire and night sounds of the wilderness their only music. The next days fell into a rhythm. They rode from dawn until dusk, keeping to lesser-known trails and avoiding settlements. Nights were spent in makeshift camps where they gradually learned each other's habits and histories. Daniel taught her to set snares for rabbits and identify edible plants. Beatrice shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis, where her father had been a moderately successful merchant before bad investments ruined them. A week into their journey, they crossed into Wyoming territory. Daniel seemed to relax slightly once they passed beyond what he considered Winter's immediate reach, though he remained vigilant. They camped near a small stream where Daniel caught trout for their dinner. As they ate, Beatrice found herself studying his hands, strong, capable hands that could be surprisingly gentle. She'd noticed more about him lately, the way sunlight brought out auburn highlights in his brown hair, the crinkles at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, the low timbre of his voice that sometimes sent unexpected shivers through her. "What?" he asked, catching her stare. Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was just thinking how different you are from Harold. He never did anything for himself if he could command someone else to do it." "Different worlds," Daniel replied. "Out here, a man who can't fend for himself doesn't last long." "And a woman?" she asked. His eyes met hers across the fire. "Same truth, which is why I'm teaching you what I can. Might come a time when you'll need to manage on your own. The thought of him leaving sent an unexpected pang through her heart. "Are you planning to go?" "Not planning on it, no," he said carefully. "But life makes its own plans sometimes. Best to be prepared." That night, as Beatrice tried to sleep, she found herself acutely aware of Daniel just feet away, his breathing deep and regular. What was happening to her? She'd sworn never to be dependent on a man again. Yet here she was, feeling things she had no right to feel for someone who was helping her out of kindness, not affection. The wedding ring seemed to burn on her finger, a reminder of vows she'd made to a monster and her current status as a fugitive wife. She was still bound to Harold, regardless of how far she ran. The thought kept her awake long into the night. Morning dawned clear and cool. They packed their camp efficiently, the routine now familiar. As Beatrice mounted Liberty, she noticed Daniel wince slightly when he swung into his saddle. "You're hurt," she said. "Old wound acting up," he dismissed. "Bullet took a piece of my shoulder at Chickamauga. Bothers me sometimes when the weather's changing." "Let me see," she insisted, dismounting. Reluctantly, he slid off Scout and allowed her to examine his shoulder. Through his shirt, she could feel the knotted scar tissue, the muscles tense with pain. "I have some willow bark in my pack," she said. "My father swore by it for his rheumatism. It might help." "I'll be fine," he protested, but Beatrice was already retrieving the remedy. She brewed a bitter tea over their rekindled fire, and though Daniel grimaced at the taste, he drank it without complaint. His eyes never left her face as she worked, something unreadable in their gray depths. "Thank you," he said when she finished packing the supplies. His voice was gruff, as though unaccustomed to expressing gratitude. "It's little enough compared to what you've done for me." He reached out suddenly, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch, brief as it was, sent warmth flooding through her. For a moment, neither moved, caught in a current that pulled them toward each other. Then Daniel stepped back, breaking the spell. "We should get moving. Storm's coming." The day proved him right. By afternoon, dark clouds had gathered and thunder rumbled in the distance. They pushed on, hoping to reach a line of bluffs Daniel remembered from previous travels, where caves might offer shelter from the impending downpour. The storm caught them first. Lightning slashed across the sky as rain fell in blinding sheets. Liberty spooked at a particularly close thunderclap, rearing suddenly. Beatrice, unprepared, lost her grip and tumbled backward, landing hard on the muddy ground as Liberty bolted. Daniel was off Scout in an instant, kneeling beside her. "Are you hurt?" Beatrice sat up gingerly, assessing herself. "Just bruised, I think." Relief washed over his face, quickly replaced by concern as he scanned the area. "Liberty's taken off with half our supplies. Scout can't carry us both far in this terrain." "I can walk," Beatrice insisted, though her ankle protested when she tried to stand. Daniel caught her as she stumbled. Without a word, he lifted her onto Scout, then mounted behind her, his arms encircling her to hold the reins. The intimacy of the position was not lost on either of them, but necessity overrode awkwardness. They found shelter in a shallow cave just as hail began to mix with the rain. Daniel built a small fire near the entrance, careful to keep the smoke directed outward. Beatrice sat huddled in their only remaining blanket, shivering despite the flames. "You're soaked through," Daniel observed, concern evident in his voice. "Need to get dry before you catch your death." He turned his back, offering privacy while she changed into his spare shirt, the only dry clothing they had left. It hung to her knees, the sleeves rolled up several times to free her hands. "Better," she said when she'd finished, though she still trembled with cold. Daniel had removed his own soaked shirt, leaving him in an undershirt that did little to hide his powerful build. He hung their wet clothes near the fire to dry, then settled beside her. "Body heat's the best remedy for cold," he said matter-of-factly, though his eyes betrayed his discomfort at the suggestion. "If you're willing." Beatrice hesitated only briefly before nodding. Daniel sat behind her, drawing her back against his chest, his arms wrapping the blanket more securely around them both. The warmth of his body gradually seeped into hers, chasing away the chill. "When I was a girl," she murmured, watching the fire dance, "I dreamed of adventure, of seeing the frontier. My father indulged my fantasies with books about explorers and pioneers." She laughed softly. "I doubt this is what he imagined for me." "What did he imagine?" Daniel's voice rumbled against her back. "A respectable marriage, security." Her hand found the wedding ring, twisting it absently. "I suppose he got half his wish." Daniel's hand covered hers, stilling the nervous motion. His calloused palm was warm against her fingers, the touch sending ripples of awareness through her. "That ring," he said softly. "It's not just money to you, is it? It's a reminder," Beatrice sighed, "of my mistakes, of believing pretty words and promises." She leaned her head back against his shoulder, suddenly exhausted. "I was such a fool." "Being trusting doesn't make you a fool," Daniel said, "makes you human." "Trusting the wrong person nearly got me killed." His arms tightened fractionally around her. "Won't happen again, not while I'm breathing." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her heart skip. She turned slightly, looking up at him. His face was inches from hers, his expression intense in the firelight. "Why are you doing all this, Daniel? Truly," he held her gaze for a long moment before answering. "Started because it was right, continued because—" He trailed off, something vulnerable flickering across his features. "Because I couldn't bear the thought of turning back." The admission hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Beatrice felt herself drawn toward him, her body acting of its own accord. His breath caught as she shifted in his arms, facing him fully now. "Beatrice," he whispered, her name a question and a caution. "I know," she replied, understanding all he didn't say. She was still married. They were fugitives. The timing was impossible. And yet, his hand rose to cup her cheek, thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone with reverent care. "You deserve better than a life on the run with a washed-up prospector." "I deserve to choose," she countered, covering his hand with hers. For once, when their lips finally met, it was gentle, a tentative question rather than a demand. So unlike Harold's bruising kisses that Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes at the tenderness of it. Daniel pulled back immediately, concern etched on his face. "I've upset you," he began, but she shook her head. "No," she assured him, a watery smile breaking through. "It's just been so long since anyone was gentle with me." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a flash of anger quickly suppressed. He drew her close again, this time in comfort rather than passion. "You should rest," he said against her hair. "Storm's not letting up any time soon." Beatrice knew he was right, but sleep seemed impossible with her heart pounding and her mind racing. Eventually, though, the steady rhythm of his breathing lulled her into slumber, her head pillowed against his chest. She woke to gray dawn light filtering into the cave. Daniel was already up, checking their belongings and peering out at the rain-washed landscape. "Liberty?" she asked hopefully. He shook his head. "No sign, but she might have circled back to where she spooked. We can check once the ground's dried a bit." Neither mentioned what had passed between them the night before, though Beatrice caught him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice. The air between them felt charged, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. They left the cave mid-morning, Daniel walking and leading Scout, who carried Beatrice and their remaining supplies. Her ankle, though swollen, wasn't broken, but walking any distance would be difficult. "There's a settlement about a day's ride from here," Daniel told her. "Bald Creek. Small place, but they'll have a doctor who can look at that ankle." "Is it safe?" Beatrice asked, thinking of Harold's far-reaching connections. Daniel considered this. "Safer than pushing on with you injured and our supplies dwindling. We'll be cautious." They found Liberty grazing peacefully in a meadow not far from where Beatrice had fallen. The mare approached at Daniel's whistle, apparently having recovered from her fright. Most of the supplies were still secured to her saddle, though some food had been ruined by the rain. With both horses recovered, they made better time toward Bald Creek, arriving as the sun began to set the following day. The settlement was little more than a main street with a handful of businesses and homes scattered beyond. A weathered sign advertised "Doctor." Ellis Thornton, physician and surgeon near the edge of town. The doctor, a balding man with spectacles and a kind face, examined Beatrice's ankle with professional efficiency. "Sprain, not a break," he pronounced. "Keep weight off it for a few days and it should heal nicely." He glanced between Daniel and Beatrice. "You folks passing through or staying?" "Just passing through," Daniel answered, a bit too quickly. Dr. Thornton nodded thoughtfully. "Hotel's full up with a cattle buyer and his men, but Widow Cooper takes boarders occasionally." House at the end of Pine Street, blue shutters. Mrs. Cooper proved to be a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s who was delighted by the prospect of guests. She showed them to 2 small but clean rooms, promising a hot meal would be ready shortly. "Your wife can rest while we eat, Mr. Morgan," she said, assuming their relationship. "I'll bring a tray up for her." Daniel didn't correct her, merely thanking her for her kindness. When they were alone in Beatrice's room, he sat on the edge of the bed, lowering his voice. "Probably best to let folks think we're married," he said. "Fewer questions that way." Beatrice nodded, though the pretense made her uncomfortably aware of her actual marital status. She twisted the wedding ring nervously. "I should take this off," she said. "If we're playing at being married, it should be to you." Daniel caught her hand, stilling it. "Keep it for now, might need to sell it if our funds run low." But they both knew that wasn't the only reason. The ring represented something unresolved between them, the legal and moral barriers that their growing feelings couldn't simply wash away. They spent 3 days in Bald Creek while Beatrice's ankle healed. Daniel ventured into town each day for supplies and information, returning with news that both relieved and worried them. No one had mentioned Harold Winters or a search for his wife, but a telegraph had arrived at the small office asking local law enforcement to be on the lookout for a woman matching Beatrice's description, wanted for arson and attempted murder. "Fortunately, there's no real law here beyond a part-time constable," Daniel told her. "But it's only a matter of time before Winters expands his search this far." They left the next morning, thanking Mrs. Cooper for her hospitality. The older woman pressed a package of food into Beatrice's hands with a knowing smile. "Whatever trouble you're running from," she said quietly, "I pray you find peace ahead." Beatrice's throat tightened with emotion. "How did you know?" "Been running myself once upon a time," Mrs. Cooper replied. "Recognize the look." She patted Beatrice's hand. "That young man cares for you something fierce. Let him help you carry the burden." They rode south toward Colorado, keeping to less traveled routes and camping rather than seeking accommodations in towns. As the landscape changed, mountains looming larger on the horizon, Beatrice felt a growing sense of hope. Perhaps they would find somewhere remote enough, far enough from Harold's influence, to build something new. The question of what that something might be hung between them, acknowledged but unaddressed. Their kiss in the cave had not been repeated, though Beatrice often caught Daniel looking at her with longing that surely mirrored her own. The impediments remained her marriage, their uncertain future, the constant threat of pursuit. 2 weeks after leaving Bald Creek, they reached a valley nestled in the foothills of the Colorado Rockies. A small river meandered through meadows dotted with wildflowers, and pine forests climbed the surrounding slopes. It was breathtakingly beautiful and felt somehow right. "We could stop here a while," Daniel suggested as they surveyed the valley from a rocky outcropping. "Good water, game, shelter. Could build a cabin before winter sets in." "A cabin," Beatrice echoed, her heart quickening at the implication of permanence. Daniel's eyes held her steadily. "Just as a way station, until we figure out our next step." But they both heard what he wasn't saying, that perhaps this could be more than temporary. That perhaps they could make a home here. They established camp near the river, and over the following days, Daniel began felling trees for a cabin. Beatrice's ankle had healed completely, allowing her to help with the construction and to tend a small garden plot where she planted seeds traded from Mrs. Cooper. Their days fell into a rhythm of work and quiet companionship. Evenings were spent by the fire, talking of everything and nothing: their childhoods, their hopes, books they'd read, places they'd seen. The one subject they studiously avoided was the future, specifically, their future together. As summer waned, the cabin took shape: a simple one-room structure with a stone fireplace at one end. They worked side by side, Beatrice learning to notch logs and chink the gaps with mud and grass. The physical labor was unfamiliar but satisfying, and she found herself growing stronger, more capable with each passing day. Daniel taught her to hunt with the extra rifle they'd purchased in Bald Creek, to set traps for rabbits, to identify plants that could heal or harm. She, in turn, organized their modest home, creating comfort from limited resources. A division of the cabin with a hung blanket provided some privacy, though their sleeping arrangements remained deliberately separate. One crisp autumn evening, as they sat outside watching stars appear above the valley, Daniel broke their unspoken agreement not to discuss what lay between them. "Winter's coming," he said, his voice quiet in the gathering darkness. "Once the snow flies, we'll be isolated here until spring." "I know." Beatrice pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "If you want to move on, find somewhere more established, we should do it soon." She turned to look at him, surprised. "Do you want to leave?" "No," he admitted, "but I need to know what you want, Beatrice. We've been living day to day, not talking about what happens next." The wedding ring felt heavy on her finger, a constant reminder of the complications between them. "I'm still married," she said softly, "in the eyes of the law, at least." "I know that too." He stared into the fire. "There are places, Nevada, some parts of Colorado, where divorce is possible, on grounds of cruelty, abandonment." "You've been thinking about this," she realized. "Been thinking about little else," he confessed, his eyes finding hers in the firelight. "I care for you, Beatrice. More than I thought possible after Caroline. But I won't ask you to live in sin, and I won't pressure you to decide anything before you're ready." Tears welled in her eyes at his consideration. How different from Harold, who had taken what he wanted with no thought for her feelings or wishes. "I care for you too," she whispered. "But I'm afraid, Daniel, afraid of making another mistake, afraid of Harold finding us." He reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. If you want to pursue a divorce, I'll help you find a way. If you want to wait, we'll wait. If you want to leave," his voice caught slightly, "I'll see you safely wherever you want to go." Beatrice interlaced her fingers with his, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I don't want to leave," she said with certainty. "The rest, I need time." Daniel nodded, lifting their joined hands to press a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was tender, respectful of the boundaries she needed, yet full of promise for what might come. As predicted, winter descended on their valley with a vengeance. Snow piled deep around the cabin, and days were spent maintaining their shelter, tending the fire, and checking traps for game. They settled into a domestic routine that felt both strange and natural, cooking together, sharing stories during the long evenings, occasionally reading aloud from the few books they owned. Christmas approached, and though neither mentioned it, Beatrice found herself wanting to mark the occasion somehow. While Daniel was out checking trap lines one day, she fashioned simple decorations from pine boughs and dried berries. She also secretly worked on a gift for him, a leather vest she'd made from a deer hide, painstakingly cured and sewn with sinew. On Christmas Eve, Daniel returned to find the cabin transformed. A small pine tree stood in one corner, adorned with her handmade ornaments. Pine boughs festooned the fireplace mantel, and she'd managed to bake a simple cake using hoarded flour and dried fruits. He stood in the doorway, snow melting from his coat and hat, his expression one of wonder. "Beatrice," he breathed, taking in her efforts. She smiled shyly. "I wanted to celebrate. It's been so long since I've had a Christmas that felt real." That night, they exchanged their gifts by firelight. Daniel presented her with a delicately carved wooden box. "For your treasures," he explained as she ran her fingers over the intricate wildflower pattern he'd etched into the lid. Inside lay a silver chain. I notice the ring bothers you sometimes, he said when she lifted it questioningly. Thought you might prefer to wear it around your neck until you decide what to do with it. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to her eyes. She removed the wedding ring from her finger for the first time since her escape and threaded it onto the chain before fastening it around her neck. It felt symbolic somehow, this literal distancing of Harold's claim on her. Daniel's pleasure at the vest was evident as he tried it on, admiring her neat stitching. You've become quite the frontier woman, he observed with pride. I had a good teacher, she replied, her eyes meeting his across the firelight. Something shifted between them that night, a step toward a future that suddenly seemed possible. When Daniel kissed her, it was with a newfound certainty, a promise of patience but also of devotion. Beatrice responded with equal fervor, allowing herself to imagine a life beyond the shadows of her past. The winter months passed in a blur of snowy days and firelit nights. They grew closer, their affection for each other deepening into something neither could deny, though physical expression remained limited to kisses and embraces. Both understood that anything more would cross a line neither was ready to traverse. Spring came late to the high country. When the snow finally began to recede, revealing patches of mud and the first brave wildflowers, Daniel broached the subject they'd been circling for months. There's a town about 3 days' ride from here, Cedar Ridge, he said, as they sat on a sun-warmed rock near the river. Larger than Bald Creek, has a proper courthouse, a lawyer. He paused, gauging her reaction. Thought I might ride there, ask about divorce proceedings. Beatrice had been considering the same question. What if they want me to appear in person? What if word gets back to Harold? It's a risk, Daniel acknowledged, but staying in limbo is its own kind of prison. Don't you want to be free of him? Truly free, she touched the ring hanging beneath her shirt. More than anything. Then let me at least find out what's possible. He took her hands in his. I won't do anything without your agreement, just information for now. Beatrice nodded slowly. All right, but be careful. Harold has eyes everywhere. Daniel departed for Cedar Ridge the following day, promising to return within a week. Beatrice watched him ride away with trepidation, fearful of being alone but equally afraid of what his inquiries might stir up. The days of his absence stretched endlessly. She tended their garden, checked the trap lines as he'd taught her, and kept the rifle close at hand. At night, she barred the door securely, sleeping fitfully with every creak and rustle from the forest beyond. On the 5th day, as she was gathering firewood near the tree line, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded through her. Daniel was back early. She hurried toward the clearing, a welcome on her lips. The words died in her throat when she saw not Daniel but 3 riders emerging from the trees. Leading them was a face she'd hoped never to see again, Harold Winters, his handsome features twisted with malice as he spotted her. There's my wayward wife, he called, his voice carrying across the clearing. Did you really think you could hide from me forever, Beatrice? Terror froze her in place. How had he found them? Had Daniel been intercepted? Was he hurt or worse? Harold dismounted, handing his reins to one of his men, hired guns by the look of them. You've led me on quite a chase, he said, approaching with deliberate slowness. Cost me considerable trouble and expense. Stay away from me, Beatrice warned, backing toward the cabin where the rifle waited. He laughed, the sound chilling her blood. Or what? Your prospector isn't here to protect you. We passed him on the trail yesterday, didn't recognize him, of course. By the time we connected him to reports of a man traveling with a woman matching your description, he was well on his way to Cedar Ridge. His smile was cruel. Asking about divorce proceedings, I understand. How optimistic of him. Beatrice continued retreating, calculating the distance to the cabin door. What do you want, Harold? Why not just let me go? You never loved me. It's the principle of the matter, he replied coldly. You're my wife, my property, and you tried to kill me, burned down my home. That's a lie. It was an accident, your word against mine, he shrugged. And who do you think people will believe? A respected rancher or a hysterical woman? She was nearly at the cabin now. If she could just get inside, get to the rifle. Harold seemed to read her intention. "Grab her," he ordered his men. Beatrice turned and ran, but one of the men was faster, catching her arm in a bruising grip before she reached the door. She fought wildly, kicking and clawing, but he was too strong. "Spirited as ever," Harold observed, approaching leisurely. "I've missed that fire, Beatrice. Though it will need to be tamed again when we return home." "I'm not going anywhere with you," she spat, still struggling, his face hardened. "You have no choice, you're my wife, not for much longer." The new voice cut through the clearing like a whip crack. Daniel stood at the edge of the trees, his Winchester leveled at Harold's chest. His expression was terrifyingly calm, though his eyes blazed with fury. Harold turned slowly, assessing this new threat. "Ah, the gallant prospector returns, earlier than expected." "Let her go," Daniel commanded, his voice steady. Harold smiled thinly. "You're outnumbered, sir, and interfering in a matter between husband and wife. Legally, I'm within my rights to reclaim her. The law might see it differently when they hear how you treated her." Daniel took a step forward. "I have witnesses. A doctor who documented her injuries when I found her. Statements from others who suspected what was happening at your ranch." Uncertainty flickered across Harold's face, quickly replaced by contempt. "Hearsay at best, and worthless if you're not alive to present it." He nodded almost imperceptibly to his men. The gunman holding Beatrice shoved her roughly aside, reaching for his pistol. The other drew and fired in one fluid motion. Daniel dropped to one knee, returning fire with deadly accuracy. The first gunman fell, clutching his chest. The second got off another shot that splintered the wood beside Daniel's head before a return bullet found its mark. Harold, seeing his men dispatched, drew his own revolver. "You think this changes anything?" he snarled. "She's still my wife. I'll find her wherever she runs." "Not anymore," Daniel replied, keeping his rifle trained on Harold. Cedar Ridge Court granted an emergency divorce petition based on extreme cruelty. Judge was particularly moved by the doctor's affidavit and Mrs. Cooper's testimony. "It's over, Winters." Disbelief contorted Harold's features. "Impossible. No court would act so quickly. Been working on it for months," Daniel cut in. "Writing to witnesses, gathering statements. The judge just needed Beatrice's sworn affidavit, which I brought with me." Beatrice stared at Daniel in shock. He had been laying this groundwork all along, preparing for a legal battle he knew might come. Harold's face darkened with rage. "I don't recognize any such divorce," he growled, raising his pistol. "She leaves with me or not at all." The shot echoed through the clearing, startling birds from nearby trees. Harold stood motionless for a moment, surprise replacing rage as he looked down at the spreading crimson stain on his chest. Then he crumpled to the ground. Beatrice lowered the rifle she'd retrieved during the confrontation, her hands steady despite the enormity of what she'd just done. Daniel was at her side instantly, gently taking the weapon. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. She shook her head, unable to speak as reaction set in. Her legs gave way, and Daniel caught her, easing them both to the ground as she began to tremble. "It's over," he murmured against her hair, holding her close. "It's truly over now." They buried the bodies in the forest, marking the graves with simple stone cairns. Neither spoke much during the grim task, though Daniel said a brief prayer when they finished, not for Harold, Beatrice suspected, but for their own peace of mind. That night, as they sat before the fire, Daniel finally told her the full story of his journey to Cedar Ridge. He had indeed been gathering evidence for months, corresponding with Dr. Thornton and Mrs. Cooper, even tracking down former employees of Harold's who had witnessed his cruelty. "I wanted you to have options," he explained, "freedom to choose your path without fear." Beatrice removed the chain from around her neck, studying the gold band that had represented her captivity for so long. "I'm not sure what to do with this now," she admitted. "Whatever feels right to you," Daniel said. "Sell it, Keep it as a reminder of what you survived. Throw it in the river. It's your choice." She considered this, then stood and moved to the fireplace. Without ceremony, she dropped the ring into the flames, watching as the fire embraced it. "New beginnings," she said softly. Daniel rose and came to stand beside her, his arms slipping around her waist. "Is that what you want, a new beginning?" Beatrice turned to face him, seeing in his eyes all the love and respect she'd once thought beyond her reach. "With you, yes." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing something small that caught the firelight. A simple band of silver, unadorned but beautifully crafted, "Made this in Cedar Ridge," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Had it blessed by the preacher there, thought maybe when you were ready." Tears blurred her vision as she extended her left hand, the finger now bare of Harold's claim. "I'm ready." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, its weight unfamiliar yet right. "I can't promise wealth or an easy life," he said, "but I swear you'll never doubt my love or my respect." "You'll never need another ring after this one, Beatrice." "I couldn't ask for more," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to seal their promise with a kiss. They were married in Cedar Ridge that summer, a simple ceremony with Mrs. Cooper and Dr. Thornton traveling to witness their vows. The town welcomed them warmly, particularly when Daniel's prospecting skills led to the discovery of a modest but profitable vein of silver in the mountains near their valley. They built a larger cabin on their land, adding rooms as their family grew, first with the birth of their daughter Emma in 1878, then twins James and Joseph 2 years later. Beatrice planted an orchard that flourished in the valley's protected climate, and Daniel's mining operation provided steady income without requiring him to be absent from home for long periods. Other families gradually settled nearby, drawn by tales of the Silver Strike and the fertile valley. By 1885, a small community had formed, with a schoolhouse where Beatrice sometimes taught and a trading post Daniel helped establish. They named the settlement New Haven, a fitting tribute to what they had found in each other. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the summer twilight, Daniel presented Beatrice with a small wooden box, similar to the one he'd given her that first Christmas. Inside lay a journal bound in soft leather. "Thought you might want to write our story," he explained, "for the children and theirs after them." Beatrice smiled, remembering the frightened woman who had fled with nothing but a wedding ring and found everything she'd never dared to hope for. "Where would I begin?" she wondered aloud. Daniel's arm tightened around her shoulders, his silver ring catching the last rays of sunset as he gestured toward the thriving valley below them, their valley, their legacy. "At the beginning," he said simply. "With a woman who escaped with only her wedding ring, and a cowboy who promised she'd never need another."